Today we're looking at the latest NHL trade rumors, starting with the Montreal Canadiens, who today traded Tyler Toffoli. Looks like they're just getting started. Who might be the next one to go? Plus, we have a few veterans on the Pittsburgh Penguins who might be used as trade bait to upgrade the team ahead of the playoffs. Plus, we also have the latest on the Flyers as well as the New York Islanders. Jack Eichel is set to return this week. Plus, we have updates on the latest injuries. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to discuss today. First up, let's talk about the Jack Eichel return in the Vegas Golden Knights and how this is all going to shake out given their very tight salary cap situation. GM Kelly McCrimmon today announced that Jack Eichel is ready to make his debut with the Golden Knights, and that will happen later this week on Wednesday when they take on the Colorado Avalanche. Of course, that's a highly anticipated game that many feel could either be a playoff series, potential Western Conference final here. These two teams have had previous playoff battles, and it could be a real solid game. Of course, it's going to have an even bigger spotlight now, knowing that Jack Eichel will be making his return to the NHL on his debut with the Vegas Golden Knights. Of course, Eichel had his, unique neck surgery that the Buffalo Sabres did not want to let him do. So instead of having the fusion surgery, of course, he had the disc replacement surgery. This was a first in the NHL. We've already had the second player going through it. Eichel will be the first, of course, to have the surgery as well as make his return. It's been a long time since he's played a hockey game, so everybody's curious to see, how he's doing, how he's going to be able to play, what kind of impact he will have. And to accomplish all this, Mark Stone, who's been battling a back injury and missed 20 games this year off and on, is going to be going on long-term injury reserve to satisfy the salary cap situation. Essentially, in order to get Eichel activated, they needed around just shy of $5 million of salary cap space. So, of course, many felt that one of their forwards, likely a Smith or a Dodonov or somebody, would likely be traded to make that room. And I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility that somebody could be moved later in the season before the playoffs. But when asked about the Stone situation, McCrimmon was basically said he really wouldn't give a definite timetable. It'll take as long as he needs in order to get fully healthy. Obviously, that's the whole point of it anyways. So you have to wonder if this is going to be a Kucherov 2.0 situation where essentially he takes the rest of the regular season off and is able to return for Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. As I mentioned before, this is technically within the rules as long as there is a legitimate medical situation that keeps him out. Then, it's not cap circumvention, as some people like to cry about. Obviously, I know in this scenario as well, Vegas would be better off probably to keep everybody they can and have more depth for the playoffs. Why wouldn't you, right? I mean, all teams would love to have that option, but of course many can't spend above the cap, and in this situation there's no cap in the playoffs, so it's a way of going about things, but you have to have legit injuries to even be able to do that. So it wouldn't be shocking, knowing Stone's back injury history, that it could take the rest of the regular season. So only time will tell, but that right now is what many suspect. And obviously if the Golden Knights are heading for the playoffs, they're in good shape. There's no need to rush Mark Stone, right? So I guess only time will tell how this is going to play out, but it'll be certainly very interesting to see Eichel's return in his debut with the Golden Knights in just a couple of days' time. Now, a few other quick injury updates here as well. Logan Stanley, who's been out for just about a month with the Winnipeg Jets, should be making his return here very shortly, so that'll be a nice boost to them. Of course, he's really developed into an important piece on the blue line, big, strong, physical defenseman. And the Vancouver Canucks and head coach Bruce Boudreau announced that they are not expecting Brandon Sutter to be able to return and play at all during this regular season. Of course, Brandon Sutter has not played at all this year. He's been on long-term injury reserve. He did have a situation where he did have a positive COVID infection, and he's one of the people that you've heard of suffering from what they call long-term COVID or long COVID or whatever you want to call it. But essentially, he's still not in a place where he can be healthy enough to return to playing hockey. So we'll see what this means for the future of Brandon Sutter's career. He is a pending unrestricted free agent. This was the last year of the contract, so I don't know what will happen from here. Of course, the Canucks are expected under the new leadership of Jim Rutherford and the management team that he's hired with Patrick Alvin, Cameron Granato, and Emily Castonguay to kind of reshape the roster at least a little bit. So it's debatable if Sutter, if his time in Vancouver is up. We'll see if his career can be resumed or not, but we certainly wish him the best, and it's certainly, you don't like to hear those types of situations for sure. So hopefully he can get through this and at least have, some progress, regardless if he returns to the NHL or not. Now, of course, on to the rest of the trade talk for today. Of course, today we saw a pretty significant trade involving sending Tyler Toffoli from Montreal to the Calgary Flames. That is a trade rumor that we've been talking about off and on for the past couple of weeks. Tyler Toffoli's been one of the names within the Habs organization that we've talked about on at least a handful of videos and where he might be heading. And the Flames and the Kings were the two teams that were the most linked to this player. Of course, two teams who had connections to this player, and I think the Habs and the Flames struck themselves a pretty good trade. I really think it's good for both sides. The Montreal Canadiens get a first-round pick, a fifth-round pick, and a prospect, along with taking a contract off the Flames' hands here for cap purposes. And Pitlick, which is only 1 year, left, which is the current year, and that's it. So no commitment to stick around and have him on your roster any longer than you want him to be there. Whereas Toffoli has a few years left of just over $4 million. Of course, he has a lot of connections in Calgary, including former head coach Daryl Sutter, who he won a Stanley Cup with in LA. Of course, he's played with Milan Lucic. He played with Sean Monahan and Jr. There's a lot of connections there, so certainly should be easy for him to jump in and get acquainted, having a lot of familiar faces within the organization. And of course, a few former Canucks there that he knows from his time that he spent in Vancouver after getting traded from LA, like Tanev and Markstrom, etc. So this will be, I think it'll be an easy transition. He's going to fit in well, shore up that second line of scoring. It might make things more difficult when it comes to the offseason, when it comes to Gaudreau, Tkachuk, Mangiapane. They may not be able to bring everybody back. So I have to wonder if this could box out a guy like Mangiapane or what that's going to do. We don't know. A lot of question marks around some of those players' future, but that will be dealt with at a later time. For right now, who's next in Montreal? And many feel like Ben Chiarot is very likely that guy. I know heading into the last couple of weeks, many felt there was a good chance Chiarot would be the first one to go, but I think the injury to Chiarot on the weekend, he's not going to be out too long, thankfully, for Montreal, probably about a week, but I think that injury was a wake-up call to get some business done ahead of time here before this happens to anybody else, and their trade value is greatly impacted. Now, of course, Chiarot's been linked to a variety of teams, including Calgary, who they already did a deal with here today for Toffoli. So, of course, in that deal, the Flames get themselves a real solid second-line scoring winger, and they didn't give up. They gave up the first-round pick, but they still have all of their top prospects. The prospect involved was a guy who came from Florida, who they acquired in a Sam Bennett deal, was probably, I'm not sure exactly where he'd rank on their prospect depth chart, but he certainly wasn't their top 3 or 4, that's for sure. So, clearly, they still have all those guys. They still have, Connor Zary and Coronado and Pelche, and all those guys are still there. They still have Dylan Dubé, who's been mentioned as a potential trade piece as well. So, will they be able to get Ben Chiarot? I really don't know, because many are saying that he's going to command a first-round pick. Well, it's already been traded. I don't see them trading, another first-round pick from another year out on top of that. So, as much as Calgary's in there, I'm not entirely convinced that it's going to happen. It could, but it's going to have to be a different return. They have to give up probably, at least a solid roster player, a top prospect. I don't know, maybe a second rounder. Hard to say exactly what they give up, but it would have to be something a little different. But we know that teams like LA and St. Louis and the Rangers to an extent, the Florida Panthers are in there. Carolina's also been mentioned. We know that the Hurricanes and the Panthers are pretty much each almost a given here to land one of the top defensemen in this trade deadline acquisitions that we're going to be seeing, whether if it's Chiarot or Klingberg or Chychrun. One of those guys will end up in Carolina. one of those guys will very likely end up in Florida. That's, they have the assets to do it. They have the space. It shouldn't be too difficult to work out. Chickering will be a little bit more complicated, of course. I wouldn't rule out the LA Kings when it comes to him as well. That seems like a natural fit, given all the prospects that they could consider tempting the Coyotes with to make that deal. But right now, Jerard likely will be the next one to go. And with all the interest, including the Flames, it shouldn't take too long before that deal likely comes together. Now, when it comes to the Penguins, we know that Ron Hextall and Brian Burke are probably pretty happy with their team. But of course, given how they've played, and in fact are going into the playoffs with a pretty high seed in the Metro, I would imagine they're going to want to bulk up a little bit here and head, to try to give themselves a little extra manpower for a potential run. And of course, they always do that. And with the future a little bit uncertain, you can say, with Letang and Malkin and Brian Rust, I think they're probably going to do their best to go for it again and sort all that stuff out later. That's typically how they like to do business there. And Frank Saravalli was reporting today in dailyfaceoff.com that a couple of players that would not be surprising at all that they could use in order to have the money going out to make things even up here for cap purposes would be either Kasperi Kapanen or Jason Zucker. I mean, those are the two players that would be the main roster players to possibly be subtracted from the roster in order to facilitate any trades. I mean, if you look at the rest of them, you know that, Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, Rust, those guys are in your top six are really not going anywhere at all. Your blue line is relatively decent. They could go for a goalie if they don't have the confidence in Casey DeSmith. I mean, they may. I mean, I know they have confidence in Tristan Jarry. They may want to add another goalie back there, just an extra reinforcement maybe. But, that's, depending on the price tag, of course. But when it comes to changing up their probably top six or top nine dynamic here a little bit, those are the guys that likely would go. I mean, Kapanen has been inconsistent, hasn't really been given a role, surprisingly, that I thought he would. And Zucker's been hurt. I don't know exactly when he'll be back, but he should be back before the deadline. That's debatable. There's been a lot of chatter around him, too. And, I kind of half wonder, considering that he's still pretty productive, would they consider bringing back Phil Kessel? Is that something they would look at? I mean, Kessel had a lot of success in Pittsburgh and won multiple Stanley Cups. He's on the final year of his contract, pending UFA. I mean, I know things were not great at the end when it come to his relationship with the coaching staff and stuff. Things were kind of difficult. I know that played a role in it as well as to why he was moved. But, for a short run and a player they're familiar with, who's used to play with Malkin and Crosby, I wonder. I mean, it might be difficult to make the money work, but you have to think maybe that might be a guy that they target. But if the Penguins do make a trade to kind of make an upgrade within their top three lines and scoring lines, those are likely the players you're going to see involved in that scenario. Now, of course, Kasperi Kapanen was originally drafted by the Penguins, went to Toronto in the Phil Kessel trade when Kessel went from Toronto to Pittsburgh, and then, of course, ended up back with the Penguins later on. So certainly would be kind of weird if they ended up being involved in a trade together once again, but only time will tell. Now, when it comes to the Islanders, Frank Saravalli of dailyfaceoff.com is also reporting that defenseman Scott Mayfield is drawing interest from a variety of teams. Understandably so. He's 29 years old. He's got a great contract. He's got one more year after this one at $1.45 million. He's a right shot. He's a big guy, 6'5", 220, 225 pounds, can play a physical style of the game, chipping a little bit offensively. Why wouldn't you be interested? Which, there's lots of teams looking for a good right shot defenseman who can play 20 minutes a night, right? I mean, I understand why there's interest. I don't think the Islanders are really in a predicament here where they have to move them, and that only is going to happen if they get a real solid return that makes it just too difficult to pass up. But their blue line's already arguably a little bit thin. Of course, they have Pelech, Pulock, and Dobson for the future, all locked up. I mean, outside of Dobson, who's going to need a new contract soon, the other two guys are locked up longer term. You take out Mayfield, and then you have Chara and Green, who might not be back. Like, they're going to have a little bit more work to do to reshape this blue line. They already need help on the left side. I just don't know if this is really the best move. So to me, I think it's possible they trade him, but it's really going to boil down to the return. If they get a great offer that they just can't turn down, then sure. But I think Lou is going to have to do something here to kind of reshape this roster a little bit, because clearly this season has been very underwhelming. They need help on the blue line, so I'm not sure subtracting from it's really the answer. And then on top of that, they could use another scoring forward as well, which I wonder if they might have to address through free agency in the summertime. So to do that, they'd have to free up some cap space. I know goalie Semyon Varlamov has been mentioned in rumors. I know the other night he had a late COVID test come back positive. He went out for warm-up and then was pulled from the game. Kind of made a lot of people think maybe something was going down, but it was turned out to be a COVID test, which actually was only required because they had traveled into Canada. So it was a border requirement. It wasn't the case at all, but given the fact that he, with the money he makes around $5 million, I mean, that would be a big cap relief if they could move him to another team. And he has been linked to the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers desperately need help in goal. He does have a 16-team no-trade list, though, so he can block half of the league. So that doesn't leave a lot of options. I don't know if he'd want to play in Canada, if he would consider that, but it's certainly somebody that I know Edmonton reportedly had at least checked in on or were considering, amongst the various goalies that they're looking at for help around the NHL. So we'll see what happens with Varlamov. Even a guy like Bailey, again, hard to move players when they're underperforming and they have term. So it's not going to be easy for Lamoureux to pull this off, but those are your main players to look at here from the Islanders heading to the deadline that could end up wearing a different uniform before season's end. Now, when it comes to the Flyers, there's also word that they're certainly looking to trade Martin Jones. I'm not sure what they're looking at for a return, but it was reported that the Oilers were offering around a 5th-round pick, and they had rejected that trade. So I don't know that it's really going to be anything much more than that. I don't know. Can they really get like a 3rd or a 4th? I don't know. I don't really think Martin Jones is all that good. He doesn't have much term on his deal. So he's definitely like a rental, but I don't know. He's been a very underwhelming goalie for a while. So to me, I'm surprised they didn't trade him for a 5th. I mean, obviously, they thought he was worth more than that. I'm not sure that he will be, but at the end of the day, he is expected to be moved to one of the teams looking for goaltending insurance ahead of the playoffs. And of course, Captain Claude Giroux, of course, who has a no-move clause. Again, every article you read, I've seen that ESPN, Frank Saravalli, Elliot Friedman, they all seem convinced that there's a pretty high probability of him going to the Avalanche. Now, it's been reported as well that because he has a no-move and all that, kind of say on where he ends up, he could tell the Flyers that there's only one team he wants to go to, which unfortunately makes it hard on them. It does get him where he wants to go, but you have to think that also hurts the value and puts them in not a great negotiating situation, so that the return on Giroux might not be as extensive as some fans might be hoping for. It depends on how that goes, though. If he's able to give multiple teams and they can kind of bid things up a little bit, that will certainly help with the return package. But if he doesn't, which he has every right to do, considering he wants to go where he wants to go, and that's how this works, I don't know. I mean, the Avalanche still seem to be the team, and a lot of people also feel that if for some reason Giroux to the Avalanche does not work out, look for plan B to be Joe Pavelski, assuming Dallas is falling out of the playoff picture. They're still kind of in the mix, but they're, on the outside looking in right now. Depending on how the next few weeks go, Pavelski very well could be a name to watch too as a potential replacement to join the Avalanche. So I would think that one of those two players would be real high on Joe Sakic's radar to acquire ahead of the playoffs. It's believed right now they're likely going to go in with what the goaltending situation they have now. They may not address anything further in that regard. I think they're relatively happy with their D. But the tricky part here is going to be fitting him in under the cap, whether it be Pavelski or Giroux. Hard to say. The return might be a little bit better than some think. In some regards, though, because they're probably going to have to retain salary, that will push up the value a bit. But at the same time, if there's only one team that he says he wants to go to, it's not going to help matter. So I don't think it's going to be maybe as massive a trade as some people might already think. But let me know what you think. Where does Giroux end up? What kind of return do the Flyers get? Let's discuss that in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.